Hi, I'm Carol Weissite.
And I'm Jody Knapp, Early Childhood Resource Specialist with Illinois StarNet. Have you ever experienced the adventuresome behavior of children in your classroom? How did you respond? Did you respond by sending a child to time out or away from the group? Or did you respond with understanding and say, this is a perfect opportunity to teach necessary skills? As teachers, we have the opportunity to impact a child's ability to regulate their behavior and develop lifelong skills that promote healthy social-emotional development.
All children thrive in an environment which supports their development and helps them acquire new skills and knowledge. Children want to be included, not excluded. Children want to be heard, not ignored. And all children want to have a sense of belonging and significance. Join us as Dr. Patrick Schwarz, professor at National Louis University, shares with us his belief that all behavior is a form of communication and that as adults, we often impact the outcome of the behavior.
When you think of possibilities versus disabilities, you have a certain connotation for both of those terms. And I remember when I first started teaching, this was in a high school situation, and we had all sorts of student files. Some of the student files, by the time they were in high school, were so big you could bench press. And when I looked through those files, it was all of the things that were problems or attributes of disability for a person. So things that qualified them for the special ed field or the special ed placement that they were in. And I was trying to look at what are some of the things that the student has in terms of interests or abilities or things such as that, and I had a difficult time finding that. So I decided to write a book about this, and it's called From Disability to Possibility. And when you're thinking about possibilities, you're looking at positive attributes of a person, things you can build on, things that you can use to create a quality of life for a person, such as living in the community, working in the community, playing in the community, and having quality in all of those facets and all of the decisions you make in terms of being a human being.
I'm washing the side now. Oh no, I'm filling the bottle up now.
I feel that all behavior is a form of communication. So the person, whenever they have a particular behavior or an adventure, is communicating something to you. And there's a young man that I met named Franklin who in the halls was starting to kick people and pull people's hair. And it wasn't super hard kicking or yanking a person's head, but it was kind of irritating. And there would be students in the hall that would experience this from Franklin. They go, hey man, stop that. And so what I asked the team to do is document when it was taking place, where it was taking place, who he was with. And the team came upon a very interesting discovery, is that Franklin was doing these types of things when he felt uncomfortable and there were new people, new scenarios, new places. He's an individual that's been labeled as having autism. And so what the team decided to do is to teach him a different type of what we would call replacement behavior, and that was asking for a break when he had those feelings. So we worked with him on identifying those feelings when he felt uncomfortable, and rather than doing hair pulling or kicking, he would say to people, I need a break. And that would be something that would serve him lifelong a lot better. And so whenever you're looking at an adventure, and we find sometimes when people are labeled as having behavior challenges or adventures, that they get a reputation before other people have a chance to meet them, is I think something that's very important is to consider what they're communicating through their particular behaviors or adventures and try to do something to support them and shape them. I think one of the most important things a teacher can do with a student is build a relationship with them. And it's the first and foremost tenet of my approach. And if you don't have a student who has a stake in your relationship and you don't have something that you've built with that person, they probably feel, that I'm not really losing anything if I try to do something or try to create an adventure to that particular person. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can find interests that the students have. You can find what drives them in life. You can find ways of incorporating some reinforcements into the classroom. I always say, though, if you use something external, so for example, a teacher who gives their classroom a pizza party, is always pair it with the internal reasons why students should feel good about something such as that. So, for example, there was a student I met named Jeff who was hitting other kids during the playground time or recess, and when Jeff was earning, for example, stickers and a choice from something if he kept his hands to himself, I said, don't just say good job, Jeff, and give him a sticker, give him a choice. Tell him internally why he should feel good. So saying something like, Jeff, you kept your hands to yourself, and look at students want to play with you now on the playground rather than not being with you.
At the beginning of the year, we go on home visits. And this helps us to establish a connection with the family, which is so important with our early step program. We do a home visit, and we want the parents to know that our door is always open for them to come and visit, whether it be for 10 minutes or be for the whole 3 hours. They can come and have lunch. They can come and paint with us. They can read a story. They can sit back and they can watch. And also another way that we communicate with the parents is we have a notebook that goes home daily in the book bag. And we can write notes to the parents, such as we can say, oh, we mixed colors today while we were painting, and your daughter had so much fun with that. Or they can write a note back to us and say, my son didn't sleep real well last night. He might be a little bit cranky, So it gives us a heads up so we know why they might be feeling sluggish. Maybe they're not feeling sick. Maybe they're just feeling tired. With that communication with parents, it helps establish a connection, and hopefully we will keep that connection. That connection will form, and that connection will stay with the children throughout their school year. We build relationships with the children. At the beginning of the year, we have the children come to school in small groups, which are 4 or 5 children each day, and that way we can get to know the children on a one-on-one basis. And we establish the rules with the children. We discuss what is expected of the children. We take them on a tour of our classroom and of the school so they have a feeling of belonging in our classroom. And when we all come together the following week, they get to see their new friends and their new family, and it provides a sense of community in our classroom. Ruth and I view the families as the children's first teachers, and that they're a very important piece of their children's education and learning experience with us at school.
We keep the children usually for 2 years. So we create a bond with them where they know they can come to us if they have a problem.
There are a lot of different skills that we can teach students, and it is another tenet of my approach to teach students skills. So I teach a collaboration course for adults who are preparing to be teachers, and a lot of the things in terms of collaboration skills are also important skills for students. So for example, one of those is team building, is how do we create a sense of community from student to student. And there's all sorts of books out there. There's collaborative games books, things such as that, to help teach students skills so they work well with each other. Another skill is active listening, or trying to build a sense of empathy. When a student brings forward an adventuresome behavior, oftentimes there's a victim. And if there's a victim in such a situation, we want to teach the student empathy, and we also want to teach them how to repair the situation. We call it reparation when there's something that's a problem. And that's an important thing for both students and adults, to be able to active listen, to be able to bring empathy forward. Another one is problem solving, and I know a number of teachers out in schools, when there's an adventuresome behavior that comes forward, there's a problem solving tool sometimes that students have to fill out before they might have a meeting with an adult, whether it would be a teacher, a principal, a student who they maybe brought something adventuresome forward to. people such as that, and that's an important skill. Another skill that I'm trying to promote in classrooms is what we would call relaxation. So Dr. June Groden, for example, has a whole relaxation protocol where you go from your head to your toes in terms of tensing and releasing muscles, and it creates a greater sense of well-being. And it's one that you don't need to have necessarily somebody coaching you through. I think when you're learning it, that's helpful, but it's eventually one that you can do for yourself. I actually am able to do that for myself too when I am feeling like I have too much energy or tense or whatever. And there's a teacher that I work with named Amy who actually is a certified Tai Chi instructor, and she's taught students Tai Chi skills, especially during those transitions when the tone of the room may be up a little bit more. So for example, when they come in after recess, is maybe there's a lot of energy, and she uses a certain type of music and they do Tai Chi, and it transitions beautifully into the next class.
In our classroom, when we encounter a challenging behavior, we have what we call a solution kit. And within that solution kit, we have pictures of different ways that children can problem solve with each other. And the way we present it to the children is I have it in a case, and I'll say, oh, you know, maybe we need to get our solution kit out and see what we can find in there. And usually it's between 1 or 2 children. And then as we open up the kit and we review what is inside the kit, we have different pictures such as share, take turns, get a teacher. It helps those children who are having a hard time finding their words to help them solve problems. It helps them find a resolution to their problem. And as we do that, we find that more children kind of congregate around the other children. So it's kind of a ripple effect in our classroom as we're teaching problem solving at such a young age. We have also found that those children that are not able to verbalize what they really want, the pictures help stimulate, you know, what is inside them, what they want to say. And then if they don't have those words, Ruth or I help them express their feelings. And then we try to have them rephrase it in their words. And they might not do it the first time, but it's a learning experience. And as we keep introducing it, we found that as the children experienced a problem, they would go find the solution kit and say, oh, we need the solution kit. And, you know, that would help them resolve the problem. Whether it be someone hit their hand on the table, they need an ice pack, or whether if they're fighting over a toy, they'll say, well, what can we do about that? You know, we present that to them, and then we work with them to solve the problem.
There are certain times of year that are really stressful for teachers. The winter, the doldrum months, February gets very tiresome, and you don't see that you're making many changes, and they are, but they don't feel that. So we brought people in to help share stress reduction techniques for adults. So things like drinking enough water, some yoga stretching type activities, brain gym activities, a 7-minute tune-up, and those things help the teachers, and then they can take that into the classroom. Even things like aromatherapy are helpful for the children. And taking that deep breath and moving on, getting in control and moving on.
When dealing with an adventuresome behavior, it's important for an adult to diagnose what happened and why. So there are a variety of different questions as adults we can ask, and part of that may be some of what we call behavior analysis or functional behavior analysis, and finding out the things such as the when, the where, the who, as I gave in the example before. For Franklin, with the hair pulling and the kicking, we wanted to find out some of those things beforehand when he was doing those behaviors to find out what he was communicating and see if there were any patterns. And so that diagnosis is an important thing. And it's kind of interesting is I'm pretty much a non-medical approach in terms of what I'm promoting, and I'm not dissing any types of medication for students. I'm thinking it's good that we go through a lot of variables in a questioning process before we would decide upon that particular step, and then we need the experts to do that. But I think there's a certain level of diagnosis in a variety of different areas that we can utilize things such as environmental variables, things such as classroom variables, teaching variables, choice, communication. All of those types of things are impacting students, and they're important areas to look at and diagnose.
Sometimes I can come in as an objective observer for the classroom, and the teacher sometimes can't see the pattern in the behavior of a child, and it's concerning them, and we've talked, and we can't find the answer that way. So I'll just write down notes, and they can look at those, and then they can sometimes see the pattern and the triggers.
The environment is really an important area to look at in terms of learners, because environments are something that we can take some pretty decent steps to shape. So, for example, there are certain students who are allergic to fluorescent lights, and there are people who can diagnose that who are allergists and things such as that. Now, that may be a pretty big step, is to remove the fluorescent lights in the classroom, but I know a number of teachers who have found some alternative ways to address that type of thing. Looking at where the student is seated, who the student is seated nearby, how they work in terms of small group situations, individual situations, are there good models for the child? And what types of classroom, maybe seating positions or arrangements help to create a learning environment for the student. Also, sometimes giving them choice within that environment, I think, is effective. Do they want to work in a particular area? Do they want to work in a small group with other students, or do they want to work alone? I think if you look at adults, you look at people that are students in universities, that they have lots of choices how they might want to do their work, and I think we should allow more choice for students. Do we always get to choose everything we do? Not necessarily, but that environment is something that we can shape for students. It could be a very helpful support mechanism for certain learners.
At the beginning of the year, we started having snack during playtime because it was one of our centers. It is still one of our centers, but as we've gotten to know the children throughout the year, we've noticed that sometimes they play better and work better together if we change things within our schedule. So we will go outside. We know that children need to go outside. They need to have that activity for their brains to grow and to kind of jumpstart them for the day, especially the boys. When we come inside, we have routine. The children unpack their bags. They sign in. And we do have some children say, "Oh, I'm so hungry, I'm so hungry, I'm so hungry." If we hear that, we like to fill their need, and we'll change our snack time. We'll say, "Okay, we're going to put snack out on the table today," and rather than 4 people having snack, we'll have as many people as that want to go to have snack, they can have snack, just because I think they feel a little bit more grounded and they're ready to learn. I've had many aha moments throughout my teaching with Early Step. Most recently, I think my aha moment is I've been to workshops and conferences and learned about the differences between boys and girls and how boys and girls learn differently and their brains are different, and that we need to make adaptations in the classroom to reach the needs of those children. So we have changed some things in the classroom. I know that boys need a little bit more activity than girls need. So we try to incorporate that in the classroom. We try to go outside and play in the morning, before we come in, and try to settle down for our center time.
Another tenet of the approach is to look beyond just the situation at hand that is occurring and actually look at, as an adult or a teacher or a member of the classroom or at home as well, is to look beyond and see if we're doing anything that actually contributes to the adventure taking place. Are there things that trigger the student's adventure that an adult is bringing forward? I actually think that's one of the toughest things, because it couldn't possibly be one of us that's doing that or contributing to it. No, it's got to be the student. It's something inherent with the student. And I think that sometimes we need to get a mirror out and look at if we're making any contributions, and that's an important area to consider when we're doing that diagnosis, when we're actually trying to create a plan to help support a learner?
I think we've all encountered challenging behaviors throughout our teaching experiences, but especially for new teachers, if they experience challenging behaviors, I think it's important to document your concerns. That's very important. To keep in touch with the family, call the family and ask them, is there anything different? Is there anything going on at home, that might be bothering their child? And talk to your colleagues. Ask them, have you ever seen this behavior? What did you do about it? Try new things. And I think it's important when you're trying to figure out where this challenging behavior is coming from is to sit back and watch the children play during playtime and try to find what is the trigger? What is triggering this child? Is it because, they're tired from the night before? Are they hungry? Usually that's when we see challenging behaviors, a lot of challenging behaviors. Not always, but sometimes.
Christian, go ahead and play with it, and when the timer goes off, then it'll be Justin's turn. Jay? Boy, you're handling this really well, Justin. I know you've been waiting all morning to do that.
One of the tenets is problem solving requires flexibility. And that's something that's really important, is that you're dealing with students who may have a variety of impacting factors or missiles kind of firing at them. And I think a lot of people these days have something like that taking place. And the missiles that we talked about before would be environmental, choice, control, teaching, physiological. And again, I don't see it as something inherently wrong or problematic with the child. It may be those external factors. And we have to be flexible, because when we create a plan for this student, sometimes it's a step-by-step approach. One thing that we've learned from the behaviorism approach is if you're trying to put a plan in place, is if ignoring is part of that plan for a learner, they may try the adventure a little more, and it may actually increase in the first part of the particular implemented approach that you're trying to put forward. And so that flexibility during that time of setting a plan forward is really essential and important for students. One of the tenets of the approach is that the last resort is asking a student to leave the classroom. And typically the reaction I get from teachers and some other people, they think I am the one who's creating an adventure myself by making that recommendation. And I'll tell you the reason that I feel that way is, if the first and foremost most important thing a teacher can be doing with a student is developing a relationship with that learner, every time you send them out and you don't problem solve it yourself as a teacher, is every time that they're asked to leave or they go to the principal's office, you're telling them that they're not a member of that particular situation at that particular time. Now, I'm not a fool. There may be some times that there are safety concerns or safety factors that would override that particular tenet of the approach. So, for example, there's a learner that I know named Anthony who threw a desk at a teacher. And I think sometimes when we see a student who does that type of thing, we say, alternative school or alternative placement, and we throw away the lock and key for that particular learner, thinking that that's the final frontier. Now, I would be the first to say is in a situation like that where there is a safety factor, is that's when the person should probably not be in a situation where they're jeopardizing their own safety and the safety of others. And then the second thing is we need to really look at what they're communicating. In this case, Anthony had some really tough things going on in his life when it was investigated. His father had left his family. His mother had a hard time finding employment and joined her sister in a different state so she could get employment. And he was having to live with his grandparents at that point and go to the same school, and he was grieving losing both parents. And so if there's a decision where the student's not in that situation anymore, that classroom, and they go to an alternative placement, I want to know what's the reintegration plan for that particular student. My feeling about excluding students from certain activities or things that maybe they're earning, such as a field trip, etc., is to avoid it at all costs. And I think that students shouldn't have to earn their way into something, and I think we do this a lot in special education or for students that have identified learning needs. My feeling is that there are students who might do something to earn their way out. So the example that I used before of a desk being thrown at a teacher, that student earned his way out. The team had to come up with a reintegration plan and take a step-by-step plan. There's other things that we do in schools too in terms of students earning their way out. So one that's commonly used is timeout. And what I found with timeout, it's removing a student just from a situation and they go into an isolated type of room or scenario. It doesn't really teach learners anything new or any replacement behaviors for that. It's just removal from the situation. In the situations where I've seen it work, it's usually when it's been newer and it's been with a very young child. Because what happens very quickly with that removal is if the kid doesn't like something about a certain subject or activity, they'll do their adventuresome behavior so they can get their reinforcement of being removed from the situation. So actually for certain learners, sometimes removal becomes their reinforcement.
The field of early childhood education is constantly evolving, so it is important to stay up with the current research. And so what I do at the beginning of the year is I survey our staff and trying to find out what topics they need or they're interested in finding out more about. And then I will present those topics at our monthly staff meetings, or I'll look for workshops or bring consultants in to help us all work together.
As an administrator, consider your support of the teachers in the classroom. Do you provide ongoing professional development opportunities? Do you help link staff with available resources? Do you provide time for the teacher to consult with other team members? Working together to address the child's behavior is a critical piece to understanding the child's actions.
Information is powerful, and it's a motivator for staff so that when they're maybe getting a little tired or they're not sure how to handle a situation, to bring information to them or to bring people to them or provide workshops gives them excitement, and they want to go back and try out new ideas, new activities, and new techniques.
In supporting Tina and Ruth in the classroom, one of the first things I do is be there to listen to them. When they have issues or concerns, they'll come to me and talk to me or call me, and I will support them, empathize with the issues that they're facing, and then we'll start thinking about things like, why is the child's behavior, what's their goal, what's the child's goal in this behavior, and then the teacher's goals, what are their goals for the children. And so we'll work our way through all of those kind of things, and then we'll decide if there are any things that we need to change or look for. And then if I don't have some answers and we can't figure that out, then I'll link them to resources. We have books, videos, we'll go to the internet and link to training opportunities like StarNet, and we'll link to other experts that can come in and talk with the teachers and give them more support, give them more ideas.
I think some of the most important factors that contribute to a successful experience for children in the classroom, first of all, I mentioned before the relationship with children, the belief in children, and I think also teachers need to realize that they have the most important job in the world. When people ask me who's the most important influential person in the world in terms of people, I don't say doctors or lawyers, I say teachers every time, because it's teachers that are the individuals that teach all the other professions. And I always say teachers are the people that give out life chances. And there's not a more important type of profession, and it's a very, very sacred type of profession too. And so it's very important to believe in learners, to realize the powerful thing that you have at hand that you're doing. Actually, teachers are creating our next society that will support us when we're all senior citizens. And so it's important to do that job very well. And again, keeping that relationship, believing in kids, problem solving. When people say who influenced them most in life, who's the person that usually comes forward? There's a teacher or two somewhere. And I think for those people who are teachers who are listening to this, is be that person. That's the best thing I can recommend, is be that person that changed somebody's life, that had that kind of influence on a particular learner's life.
While we often think that there must be something new that we can learn about handling challenging behaviors, sometimes it is in revisiting the basics that we learn the most about working with children. It is important for us to step back and take a closer look at what the behavior is communicating. Have we developed a relationship with the child? Have we designed an environment that invites children to discover and explore? Have we taught children skills necessary for interacting with other children and adults? We hope that you will consider using Patrick's tenets of approach as you continue your important work with children and families. Thank you for joining us for this month's Apples Video Magazine.